Good evening, everyone. We'll begin by setting our motivation. And this motivation tonight is actually something from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, from a book, a very beautiful little book called Making Life Meaningful. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche starts off by emphasizing how important it is for us to know the difference between what is Dharma, what's not Dharma, what's a spiritual action and what isn't. And so take, for example, 4 people reciting the same Buddhist prayer. The first person recites this prayer with the motivation of achieving enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And because of this motivation, the recitation does become a cause of enlightenment, of full awakening, not only for the person doing the recitation, but for all sentient beings. The second person recites the prayer motivated by the desire for his or her own liberation from samsara. This action does not become a cause for full awakening of all sentient beings, but instead it becomes the cause for the everlasting happiness of liberation of that person alone. The third person recites the prayer with the motivation of receiving happiness in future lives. And the result of this is neither enlightenment nor liberation, but simply happiness in a future life. The fourth person, however, recites the prayer motivated by attachment and clinging to the happiness of this life. And even though it is a Dharma prayer, a teaching of the Buddha, this person's recitation is not a Dharma action. It's a worldly Dharma, the cause of suffering. Because the motivation of attachment, clinging to this life, has the negative effect of disturbing the mind, of making it unpeaceful. That's why it's a cause of suffering. Therefore, such motivation is labeled non-virtuous, as is the action itself. Lama Tisha, the great Indian yogi and pandit who was invited to Tibet to re-establish the pure Dharma, was asked by his translator, Drom Toppa, himself an emanation of Avalokiteshvara, what are the results of actions done simply for this life? Lama Tisha replied that such actions cause unfortunate suffering rebirths in the 3 lower realms. So we can think of other examples other than just recitation of a prayer. We can reflect on our participation in this review tonight of chapter 12. And we can think of even more mundane things that happen throughout the day, like walking, sitting, sleeping, eating, talking, working at our jobs. Everything we do, even breathing. And every single action can become a cause of enlightenment or or liberation, or happiness in future lives, or rebirth in the suffering lower realms. And it all depends on our motivation. So let's really set firmly tonight the motivation in our mind and heart to make the next hour and a bit engaging in Aryadeva's 400 for the benefit of all sentient beings, with this aim of full awakening. And by doing that, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche loves to say, incredible benefit will happen. Incredible, unlimited benefits. So, Venerable Children is on the eastern part of this country, teaching somewhere tonight. Where is she tonight, Venerable Damcho?
In Cleveland.
In Cleveland. And so here we are, working on Chapter 12, the review. And I thought tonight we would make it so that our friends online can have first dibs at answering the questions. We won't do that with every question because it would be a little bit long. But I think we'll do that for the first few questions anyway, and then throughout we'll see when it's appropriate. And everyone here, you'll just have to keep your arms down and just restrain yourself so we give our friends a chance to respond. And then the other thing I'd like to ask of everybody, including the online people, and only Venerable Damcho will see this for the online folks, but if you see or hear something where we're going radically in a wrong direction, flap your arms and stand up and scream, and let's get this boat back on track so that we don't get ourselves confused. So again, this is a review. This is not a teaching. This is just a review of Chapter 12. And in looking at the material for this chapter, I'm not sure about this, but it seems like Aryadeva wanted to give us a bit of a break and get us to sort of regroup for the grand finale of the next final chapters so that we're not totally discouraged, or maybe that was my thinking. But I think this is probably a little bit more graspable than some of the other chapters. So Chapter 12 starts off with refuting. The whole thing addresses refuting the wrong views, especially refuting true existence of that which is viewed. So in the style of Venerable Children, I thought I'd read the summarizing stanza for this chapter right now, so that we can get a feel of what this is going to be dealing with. And so the summarizing stanza says, Become a proper vessel for good explanation, and learned in the non-inherent existence of dependent arising, the final object of the path that severs worldly existence, the understanding of which frees from attachment to extreme views. So, if you've done some review, the chapter starts out by talking about the qualities of a receptive listener. So we're going to... Oh, and I think what I'll do too is I'll just read the very first... the chapter starts off with a question, actually. And the question posed says this: Even though you have explained selflessness very clearly and extensively, and the Tathagata fully understood and gave instruction on it, why do most people not follow this teaching? And the answer is, well, although the one who formulated it and those who elucidate it may be the perfect embodiment of greatness, a listener with great qualities is extremely hard to find. Okay, so here we go. we're going to dive right into the first question, which asks, what are the 3 qualities of a person who is suitable to listen to the teachings on emptiness? And then following that, what are the 5 qualities of such a listener? Okay, friends online, let's go. And Venerable Damcho, can you say it in a loud voice?
Unprejudiced, intelligent, and interested.
Okay, so we're going to expand on those. So what does it mean to be unprejudiced? Anyone online there? Okay, what does it mean to be unprejudiced?
Not attached to our own views.
Mm-hmm.
Open to listening.
Open to listening. Mm-hmm.
To be open to ideas that challenge our own.
Mm-hmm. And what I have is someone who's not attached to their own position, as you mentioned, not adverse to others. We may not understand a good explanation because someone else has explained it. Okay, what is this intelligent business about?
To differentiate between good and bad.
To
differentiate between good and bad.
Right, to be able to differentiate between good and bad.
What makes sense and what doesn't. I mean, it's not the kind of wisdom we go to school for 25 years for. It's the kind of wisdom you get just by, it's a wisdom intelligence.
Right.
You know, kind of being able to know who's teaching the Dharma and who's not teaching the Dharma.
Are these answers from the audience audible to everyone online?
From the audience?
From this audience? Yeah? Okay, because that'll save me repeating things.
Yeah, because people can hear them.
Okay. So, to repeat again, being able to differentiate between good and bad explanations, and without this it's likely we will reject a good explanation and adopt strange views. Sometimes wrong views are comfortable for us. Sometimes, maybe often. So we need to think clearly and assess and evaluate things. So this is not referring to worldly intelligence, as mentioned in this verse, because as we know now, and we've seen it in ourselves, I've seen it in myself, but I'm not saying the next part, I'm not saying I have high intelligence, but people with high intellect may encounter the teachings and have absolutely no interest in them whatsoever. Absolutely zero. Then I found a very interesting statement about what people can do with their worldly intelligence, those who are extremely bright. This may shock you because it shocked me. So here we go. Since 1942, more than 100,000 scientists of the Manhattan Project had been working on the nuclear bomb's development. At the time, it was the largest collective scientific endeavor ever undertaken. It involved 37 installations across the U.S. It involved 13 university laboratories and a host of prestigious participants, such as the Nobel Prize-winning physicists Arthur Holey Compton and Harold Urey. So if you can imagine, you have this fabulous intelligence and you use it to develop the atomic bomb. That's shocking. And so I thought I'd go into the kinds of intelligence so that we feel uplifted. And so intelligence is a distinct mental factor that has the function of discriminating precisely with analysis the qualities, faults, or characteristics of an object held by mindfulness. It cuts through indecision and doubt with unilateral certainty and maintains the root of all positive qualities in this and future lives. And so, as Venerable Semke mentioned just a few moments ago, there's different kinds of intelligence. So there's the first kind that we're familiar with, the inborn intelligence. We're familiar with this just because we've been tested to death in school. And this is the natural acuity of mind that we have due to our karma from previous lives. So sometimes we can just get sort of discouraged about that and think, well, my IQ is this number, that's it, I'm hooped forever. But not so, because there's other wisdoms that we can cultivate. So there's the wisdom arising from hearing. And that kind of understanding comes when hearing or discussing a topic. There's the wisdom arising from contemplation. This is the understanding that comes through thinking about a topic on our own. And then there's the wisdom arising from meditation. And this is the understanding that's conjoined with serenity and insight. And when we try and integrate the teachings. And so, on this point, Venerable Chodron goes on to explain that a lot of what we call meditation is actually thinking and reflection. Because we're trying to get a right conceptual understanding of the teachings, which we really need in order to integrate them into our mind. So thinking and reflection can be done seated in meditation posture. It can also be done by discussing the Dharma with other people. And that's one of the purposes of debate, actually, so that you can develop a correct understanding of the teachings. Because just hearing the teachings themselves, you may or may not correctly understand it. If you meditate on an incorrect understanding, you're not going to get where you want to go, obviously. So you do the thinking, discussing, debating kind of thing to make sure that you have a correct understanding. And then the third quality is this aspect of being interested. So what does it mean to be interested in the teachings? People online, you're first.
There's a lag.
That's okay.
Be a sincere listener.
Okay.
Be curious and inquisitive. I mean, gosh, if you're not curious about the Dharma, you're just not going to go, you're not going to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have some...
So you don't wait for the teacher to feed you all the answers and everything. You work, you take time to look into and do research, and that shows interest.
So it's having a keen interest and sincerity, as you mentioned, Venerable Semke. And without this, of course, we won't even try. Or we'll listen with a poor motivation, and in some odd cases, I'm sure it's odd cases, to gather enough information so you can call yourself a teacher, get a website, get students, be famous, and have people bow to you like crazy. So instead, of course, we want to discover what the correct path is. We want to learn the Dharma. We want to have enthusiasm in searching for the right path to follow. So those are the main three qualities, and then there's two more. So I don't think the people online gave us the next two qualities yet. Okay, here we go.
Being respectful and appreciative of the teacher and teachings.
Yes.
And being completely attentive.
Okay, let's go to the other one first. Being respectful of the teacher and the teaching. So what does that mean? Okay.
Recognizing how valuable both of these are. Just how valuable the teacher and teachings are.
Being properly prepared.
Being properly prepared, right.
Also realizing that they have spent years and years of not just hearing, but thinking and meditating on the teachings, and that they've put a heck of a lot of years and work and practice into it to be able to give us the teachings in a direct and pure way. So they've put a lot in just to give it to us.
Right. So making the effort, as you said, and the time to review the teachings, reflect and meditate on them, just not take notes and fill scribblers. And as Venerable says, put those scribblers on the shelf and let them collect dust. But yeah, exactly, to teach in the way that our teachers teach, and they're not looking at a script. They've got it in their heart and mind, and they just can deliver it so that we can all hear it, not just some of us, but all of us. And what was the last one that was mentioned? Completely attentive. Well, yeah. So we got the cat's attention. It may have been set up, but yeah. So not looking to where the distraction is, not watching the cats, do whatever they do down here, and cultivating awareness and taking a note of when we wander off and get distracted, or watching the fan spin in the ceiling, or just letting our discursive thoughts run wild while, we're having this precious opportunity to hear the teachings. And so the upshot of all that is that we have these qualities, and the more I will benefit from hearing the teachings and studying, the more I'm going to understand it. And then the more that the student will actually see the teacher's good qualities as good qualities, and not as faults, of course. Okay.
I just wanted to make a point that
Yes.
Venerable did the last of this, is that I don't think I spend too much time thinking about which ones I have and which ones I don't. And so when I thought about this, the quiz, I actually sat down and thought about them, and she even says that we may not even have them. That's the part that I have to keep remembering, is that these are not qualities that if you weren't born with them, you're out of luck. Is that if you don't have them, you can still cultivate them.
Yeah, good point.
To really be honest about, how attentive am I? When does my curiosity wane? I'm just bored. To just watch my mind, which qualities I have that are more stronger than the other ones, and which ones do I need to really nourish?
Right.
That is possible.
Right.
And then the laziness of discouragement doesn't show up. If I don't have some of these qualities, I go, well, why try?
Right. That's a really good point. And the one with being completely attentive. I know when we were in, let's see, where were we? Washington, D.C. And we had this incredible opportunity to hear His Holiness teach. And this one afternoon, I noticed that everyone around me was passing out. They were just falling asleep. And I was having a little bit of a judgmental mind about this. And then before I knew it, I was doing one of these. I thought, okay, completely attentive. Yeah, I don't have it either. So to be honest and humble about what we have to cultivate. All right, question 2. Again, we're going to go to the online people first. What are the 10 qualities of a qualified Mahayana spiritual mentor? Okay.
With the comments coming in about still the previous
Oh, are there any things that...
being inattentive and how often that has a karmic cause.
okay.
Not respecting text in the past.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, here's the list. Many lists coming in. Let me start with the first part. So discipline, calm, peaceful, rich in spiritual knowledge, having the wisdom that understands emptiness, knowledge greater than the students, wisdom and skill in presenting the teachings and guiding others. Having love and compassion as a motivation, being untiring in their effort to help. Patient and able to bear in gratitude.
Okay. Did we miss any? Was everyone on...
Could you tell me what you listed and which one was the 7th one?
The 7th one for her, I believe, was wisdom and skill in presenting the teachings and guiding others.
Yes.
Okay. Well, rather than just sort of having that list and then blasting through it on to the next thing, I found a very beautiful example in this book, Becoming Enlightened, by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And it talks about this list, but in a very beautiful way that is just so inspiring. So I thought I'd read this. Maybe I can read it without my glasses. Maybe not. Okay.
Wisdom.
And so, yeah, right. So, as you hear this passage, just take note of the qualities that are on your list. So this is His Holiness the Dalai Lama saying, knowing the qualifications of a teacher. In general, a teacher is useful for gaining knowledge, and it is particularly important for a teacher of spiritual topics to be properly qualified. Chief among these qualifications are expertise in the spiritual texts and direct experience of what is being taught. Since the very purpose of Buddhist learning is to discipline the mind, a teacher of such knowledge could not help tame anyone else's mind without first having tamed her own. Therefore, a teacher must herself possess inner qualities of experiential realization and scriptural understanding surpassing those of her students. So how is this accomplished? Through the 3 trainings in morality, meditative concentration, and wisdom. Specifically, whether you have taken monastic vows or you are a layperson, as a teacher you should have sufficient training in morality such that your senses are controlled. Otherwise, your senses will be like wild horses, pulling you into unfit actions. Also, you need to have experience in one-pointed meditative concentration so that you can overcome distractions such as external excitation and internal dullness. Furthermore, you need the wisdom of selflessness and specifically the emptiness of inherent existence in order to thoroughly pacify counterproductive emotions that make your mental continuum intractable. At a minimum, you need some familiarity with selflessness by way of scriptures and reasoning. To teach trainees, it is necessary to have a wealth of scriptural knowledge as well as acquaintance with and understanding of a range of teachings, so that when teamed with skill and techniques of instruction, you can stimulate understanding in students. To accomplish this, you need to be energetically enthusiastic about improving the welfare of your students, to have only loving sympathy for them, and to forego any personal concern about the hardships involved in explaining doctrines over and over and over again until they can sink in. Just as it is important for those who want to be teachers to work at gaining these qualities, so it is important for students to understand the attributes of a good spiritual teacher and to try to find someone endowed with them. If you can't find anyone who has all of these attributes, at least find someone who has more good qualities than defects. Avoid those whose defects predominate or who are in the same situation as you. There are Tibetans in various parts of the world who are attempting to teach but are not qualified to do so. Students need to take care in order to avoid such teachers. Rushing headlong into this venture is inappropriate. Analyze first. Just as a teacher needs the power of analysis to become learned, so does a student need analysis from the very start. Buddhist doctrines aim at providing antidotes to the three poisons of lust, hatred, and ignorance. For this, discriminating wisdom is needed. Kunu Lama Tenzin Gyaltsen once told me a story about Patrul Rinpoche, a great Lama from the southeast province of Tibet called Kham. He was an upholder of the tradition of Shantideva's A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Patrul Rinpoche was a true monastic and lived very simply. Once when he was visiting an area, many students had gathered around him, and many local people had come to have an audience with him. A bit fed up with all the fuss, he went off on his own to another village, where he asked a family for a place to stay. The mother of the family took him on as a servant, where he swept the floor and performed other chores, including emptying the nightly urine pots. After a number of days, several monks arrived, inquiring of the lady of the house whether their Lama was staying anywhere in the vicinity. She asked for a description of him, which they provided, whereupon she understood what she had done and was completely embarrassed. Real Lamas, like Patrul Rinpoche, assume a humble posture, even though they are endowed with tremendous qualities of character. In Sanskrit, the word for Lama is Guru, which literally means heavy, in the sense of being possessed of many great qualities leading to altruistic activities. Nowadays, many so-called Lamas have lost sight of this. The height of their teaching thrones and the elegance of their special hats do not reflect their inner state. If you find a qualified teacher, you will value her. The best way to do this is to achieve what she teaches. Very beautiful, very inspiring. Okay, I think we can move on to question 3 unless someone else in the room here has something else to add. Okay, question 3. All non-Buddhists and followers of lower Buddhist tenets agree that one attains nirvana by giving up attachment to everything associated with afflictions. Why then do they dislike it when the Buddhist says the person and the aggregates are empty of inherent existence? So this is a longer, well, a medium-long answer. Would anyone in the room like to take a shot at this? Okay, Venerable Sankhe. Should I hand the mic to Venerable Sankhe, or is it okay?
I think it's okay.
Okay.
Well, mine wasn't that long. But this is what I kind of figured out, that the person who agreed with the Buddha about attaining nirvana disliked the teachings on the emptiness of the person, the aggregates, because they continue to think that when the Buddha says the person, the aggregates are empty of inherent existence, they think he is negating the very nature of existence. Because they think emptiness means non-existence, they believe that, because they think that things inherently exist, that there's something wrong with his thinking. So, they want to go through the trouble of attaining nirvana by giving up attachment, but because they believe the self is inherently existent, the person, the aggregates, they think the Buddha is sort of being contradictory to the basic tenet of how to attain nirvana. So they don't want to give up their view of inherent existence. I think they think the Buddha's a little bit on the side of nihilism. That's my read on that question.
Right.
It seems like someone who has that view too comes up with the question, then who attains nirvana? Who becomes enlightened if the self doesn't exist, because
Right.
They believe it's
self,
Right.
they think the self is existent.
Right. Chopra?
They might know about attachment because of their views. They don't actually have a method to get rid of it.
They don't have a method to get rid of it. Yeah. So this is what I had, in addition to all of that, which is also right on. People don't understand what emptiness is, and they have this wrong idea. And so even though the Buddha is teaching how to eliminate attachment, all they do is freeze like deer in the road and say, well, that doesn't work. And then maybe they go back to their ascetic practices, thinking that torturing the body, being extremely ascetic, will counteract the attachment, which it doesn't. Or they go to the other extreme of self-indulgence and sense pleasure, thinking that if you have more and more and better, eventually you'll get tired of it, and that will eliminate your attachment. And this doesn't work. But what does work, they're very afraid of. Okay.
It would seem also within that context that there's quite a superficial understanding of what attachment is. Right? So if we don't have an understanding of the cause of it, that our self-grasping is what's propelling us to those things, then even saying, yes, we agree that nirvana comes about through eliminating attachment, even that basic premise isn't supported by reasoning. Yeah,
Yeah, good point. Yeah, right.
And thus they haven't let go of the attachment to self, and that's why they don't want to hear self doesn't exist.
Right.
Right.
Another thing in the text that's kind of interesting is that I guess they're talking about their views again, but it's this thing that nirvana isn't produced by doing this or not doing that, getting this or dropping that. He says it's beyond causality, space, and time, and because remember, nirvana isn't produced. So, when you think about what the non-Buddhists were doing, they were dropping this and doing that. You know what I mean? They were doing a lot of stuff with the body. And the view doesn't work.
Are we ready to go on? Question 4. I think we'll start with the online people again. How does having an understanding of emptiness help us have strong confidence and certitude in the Buddha's teachings?
So this is part of an answer. It starts with, once we see that things have no existence from their own side, we know that our mind changes moment by moment. And because our mind changes, our afflictions, obscurations, and so forth are not set in stone. Therefore, we can become Buddhas by practicing the path. This gives us a lot of energy and confidence to put them into practice. And also we know that they are unique to Buddhism, so we see that there's no other method to liberation and peace in any other teachings except for the Buddhas. These are the teachings on emptiness.
Okay. There's something very nice and insight into emptiness from Geshe Jampa Tegchok. So he says this about how emptiness can grow our confidence. Worldly people are attracted to objects and people they find beautiful and desirable. They feel greatly drawn to them, yearn for them, and think about them a great deal. As Dharma practitioners, we cultivate a similar feeling about emptiness. We want to understand it and think about it as much as we can. When we hear someone say the wisdom realizing emptiness, we smile inside and feel so happy. Yeah. Just like a worldly person does when he or she hears the name of the person he or she is attached to. We cultivate great confidence by understanding that the realization of emptiness will enable us to uproot ignorance completely and thus cut the root of cyclic existence that has caused us to suffer for beginningless lifetimes. We feel joy at the idea of forever banishing ignorance, afflictions, and the contaminated karma that causes samsaric rebirth. Our lives have a deep sense of purpose, so that no matter how difficult, we will not give up our efforts to try to understand and realize emptiness.
I've got a few ideas here too.
Great.
Okay, it helps us to gain confidence and certainty in the Buddha's teachings because emptiness helps us to see that things don't exist as they appear. We believe things do exist as they appear, and that's where we get into so much trouble. All the grasping, all the pushing away that gives rise to the afflictions, and then we act on them, create karma, and there we go. If things are empty of this solid and dependent existence, are like a dream more than anything solid, then we can actually work with our minds in relationship to ourselves and other phenomena. We won't get caught up in the appearances of this life, spend more time on using this understanding to free ourselves from cyclic existence, which propels us from one rebirth to the next. And because the Buddha's taught such a clear path that's so specific and so laid out, and that he has attained that as well. So there's sort of gaining the confidence when we see what we do doesn't work, what the Buddha did does work, and so we can sort of start changing how we're doing things.
Also, I would say with that, the bridge of that understanding is to see our teachers who teach about emptiness and their qualities, and so we have a direct experience of the result of somebody practicing and understanding, like His Holiness.
I have two more things. One is from Venerable Children. She says this: when we really begin to understand emptiness, the compassion becomes much deeper. And so much more, we become so much more tolerant, impartial, and patient. Also, our confidence that it's possible to eliminate the suffering of sentient beings, us included, becomes stronger. This is because we realize how suffering is just this construct based on a very wobbly base, which is grasping at things in a totally unrealistic way. We begin to feel very confident that, wow, the root of the suffering can be eliminated. And this is great news. And so then we have a lot more energy for practice because it doesn't seem hopeless. And then back to Geshe Jampa Tegchok from Insight into Emptiness. He says this: when we understand that things are dependent, it's impossible to simultaneously think they're independent because the two are opposites. Similarly, the way the wisdom realizing emptiness apprehends an object and the way ignorance apprehends the same object are totally opposite. Thus, they cannot be manifest in the mind at the same time. Wisdom eventually triumphs over ignorance because wisdom perceives things as they are, while ignorance is erroneous. It is not possible for an erroneous mind to conquer wisdom because that erroneous mind does not have any valid base. Wisdom, on the other hand, rests on the valid base of knowing the ultimate mode of existence of all phenomena. Understanding this gives us confidence that we can gain this wisdom. We can use it as an antidote to ignorance and the other afflictions, and thereby attain liberation and enlightenment. It also illustrates that every sentient being has the possibility of becoming a Buddha, because after learning the way to cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness, everyone can develop this wisdom. And then I have another thing from His Holiness. This is a great book that I just discovered, the Dalai Lama at Harvard. And this is very cool. So he says this: depression caused by disintegration of the ego probably comes from not being able to posit a conventionally existent I. Still, when some understanding of emptiness develops, you have a different feeling of I than that to which you previously were accustomed. Our usual feeling is that the I is something solid, really independent, and very forceful. Such no longer remains. But at the same time, there is a sense of a mere I that accumulates karma and performs actions. Such a sense of self is not at all a source of depression. We'll hear more from this book in a bit. And then I have 3 other full pages about how we can get confidence, or how emptiness gives us confidence, but I don't think we'll get to it tonight. So, does anyone have anything to add to that? Okay. The goal is to do 8 questions tonight, people online. Okay, here we go. All right, question 5. What are evident or obvious or manifest phenomena? What is slightly obscured phenomena or slightly hidden? And what is the very obscured phenomena? So we have to make examples of each. Which one is emptiness, and what types of cognizers is each one not validated by? So I thought we'd do one type of phenomena at a time rather than flipping back and forth. So does anyone in the room want to start by talking about evident or obvious or manifest phenomena?
Well, evident is things that can be known through direct perception. So anything can, especially by the senses. So the staircase, the tanka, the green clock. We can see them easily. We can hear them. We can taste them. The type of cognizer, I just put direct perceiver. I don't know if that's true or not. I couldn't find these, a little bit harder to do these. And what was the other question? So there was that, make examples, which, okay.
I think on that, there's one thing that should be said, is from what I've read, I think you have to say it's
so reliable?
It's something, how do you say that?
What I found...
An ordinary person.
Right.
Yeah, it's an ordinary person with direct sense perception that sees the... Yeah. Yeah. And then...
I think those were the 2 questions for that.
And then what type of cognizer is each one not invalidated by? It's actually... Yeah, it's kind of an interesting...
It's the same question.
Yeah,
the same answer.
right. So just to blow that up a bit more, obvious, manifest, evident phenomena are those that are immediately evident to us, so us being ordinary beings. All the objects perceived by our 5 sense consciousnesses are obvious phenomena. Non-defective sense consciousnesses know obvious phenomena directly, without having to rely on reasoning or logic. For example, with our eye consciousness, we know various colors. Just by looking at them, we know shapes. We know there's a telephone here. Our auditory consciousness hears sounds. Our gustatory consciousness directly knows sweet and sour tastes. Tactile consciousness directly knows smooth, rough, hot, and cold. And then His Holiness the Dalai Lama also includes that the self or person is in the class of manifest objects. For example, when we say, I am hot, I am walking, it's not necessary to use reasoned analysis for the existence of the I, thus it is a manifest phenomenon. Okay. And as you mentioned, statements regarding what is obvious are not damaged by direct valid cognition. For example, if it is a teaching about water and it says that it runs uphill, there is contradiction by direct perception. Okay. Who would like to tackle slightly hidden, slightly obscure phenomena? Oh, online people, go.
So slightly obscure means not immediately evident. We have to use reasoning to see them. For example, emptiness. And we add that it's not invalidated by an inference.
Okay. Okay. I have something more about that from Geshe Champa Tegchok.
Validated by inference.
Inferential cognition.
And specifically, well, I'll get to that in a minute. So there's a specific time of inference that is not invalidated by. So Geshe Champa Tegchok says this: slightly obscure phenomena cannot be known straight away. To understand them, we initially need to use reasoning. Reasoning is in the realm of our mental consciousness. For example, the Brahmins who recited the Vedas in ancient India believed that sound was permanent. The impermanence of sound cannot be known by the auditory consciousness of ordinary beings. We must first understand it by applying reasoning, such as the syllogism: sound is impermanent because it is a product of causes. Like impermanence, emptiness is also a slightly obscure phenomenon. Thus, we must initially use reasoning to understand it. We can't just sit still, close our eyes, and expect the emptiness of inherent existence to appear to our minds. This is especially true because inherent existence appears to all consciousnesses of sentient beings, except to an Arya's meditative equipoise on emptiness. Because all of our conventional consciousnesses are contaminated in this way, the only way to initially realize emptiness is by reasoning. After we realize it inferentially, by practicing meditation that combines the single-pointed concentration of serenity with a probing awareness of insight, we will gain a direct, non-conceptual realization of emptiness. At this time, as we know from Venerable and other teachers, it said the mind and its object are like water mixed with water, no perception of subject and object. So yes?
I want to go back to that because I'm kind of stuck on it. So the question, I had a hard time with this. Slightly hidden phenomena are not invalidated.
Yes.
You're saying by inferential cognizing.
It's actually that's the one that validates it.
That's what validates it. So that's not the right answer.
Well, it says not
Well,
invalidated.
this is...
Not invalidated.
Yeah, it's not invalidated by a sense perception of ordinary beings. That's what you're just saying in there.
We're on slightly hidden now.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm talking about.
So this is from...
What I'm saying is completely exactly what you're saying, but it's not what
Okay.
you're saying. That's my point. Do you understand? No.
Not invalidated sounds like validated.
No, it's different.
So slightly hidden are not invalidated by inference through power of the fact.
Right. That's not the same as sense.
Inference through power of the fact.
Not invalidated.
If a passage teaches the slightly hidden and says that persons possess substantial existence, this is damaged by inference by power of the fact.
I think I'm having a lot of trouble with the double negative.
Yeah, it's yeah. This is where I spent.
I mean, I think I understand what it's saying, but I can't make that sentence work. Sorry.
Or
I'll just let it go.
maybe I don't know if this is right, but instead of not invalidated,
Because basically our sense perceptions can't apprehend hidden objects.
yeah,
And you need inference.
right.
Down to that.
Right.
But I can't make that sentence work, so whatever.
Or maybe even not harmed by inference through power of the fact.
Well, it can't not be invalidated by sense perception because it can't be perceived.
It can't be harmed by sense perceptions because sense perceptions can't do anything. It's validated by inference and not invalidated.
invalidated by inference.
Right.
Both.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
where,
That will have
Well-
trick questions in here.
Yeah.
the way it's written is hard. You need-
But I think what we have here is what it is.
Yes, we have to understand.
So we just have to work at figuring out what the words mean.
Read that.
Slightly hidden are not invalidated by inference through power of the fact. Inference through power of the fact is using reasoning. So if a passage teaches the slightly hidden and says that persons possess substantial existence, this is damaged by inference by power of the fact.
But it's a mistaken,
I can't use that language that way, sorry.
Okay,
wrong conception.
we're going to go on to the next one. Which, maybe all of this is extremely hidden. It is for me. So the last category is very obscure. Another way of saying it is extremely hidden phenomena. People online, what's that?
We know them by depending on the words of a reliable expert. Sorry, let's go back. Yeah, it can
That's
only
true.
be known by authoritative testimony, such as karma and its effects.
For example, the classic one is to know our birth date. We rely on our parents. However, I have a story to tell you about that one. In the 90s, when I was teaching in Alberta, we had a number of Kurdish immigrants come to the school where I was teaching. These were beautiful people. They got some kind of lottery. They were in a camp for a number of years, and then they got this lottery, and they landed in Edmonton, Alberta. You know, and these people were not, they were, you know, living in the mountains. There was no one was literate. And so, you know, all of a sudden, girls and boys are going to school. And it was very interesting because I noticed looking at their information after a while that everybody had the same birthday. And everybody had the birthday of July 1st, which is Canada Day. And at first I thought, wow, maybe there's a certain time of year in that culture where... and 9 months later, like, hello. But it was like across the boards. You know, 5-year-olds had this July 1st and 15-year-olds had... so, and then it was sort of ballpark as to how old everyone was. And so it was like,
Authoritative.
So what happened was they got to the, you know, customs officials, and the good old custom officials assigned them a birth date and a year of birth. Who knows? So, all right. But usually I think we can count on the fact that our parents kind of have it figured out. So similarly, to understand the minute details of the functioning of karma and its effects, we rely on the Buddha and his explanations. Okay, so here we go again with this. Extremely hidden, very obscure, are not invalidated by inference through conviction, also referred to as inference through power of belief, or to rely on authoritative testimony. So, if a passage teaches a very hidden topic, such as saying that happy migrations arise from giving, whereas they actually arise from ethics, that is damaged by inference through belief. By another scripture which teaches a very hidden phenomena, for example, that resources arise from giving. So scriptures which are not damaged in any of these three ways are said to be free from the three contradictions. Okay, now we're going to go back to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And this has some information that just adds to what we've been talking about so far. With regard to very hidden objects, these are phenomena such as very subtle presentations of particular actions and their exact effects. How can very hidden phenomena be realized? Here one must rely on another third factor. For instance, the people in this room are manifest phenomena. It's not necessary to use any reasoning to realize their existence. However, if we considered whether there are any persons on the other side of that wall, we would look for a sign of a person's being there. such as whether anyone is speaking or cars are moving, since there would not be any of these unless a person is there. Even further, if we wondered whether a flower is growing outside the wall on the eastern side of this room, there's no way that we could look into the matter from here. Thus, as a technique, we have to depend on the speech of someone who has seen whether there are flowers there or not. Now, if we are to rely on someone's speech, we have to look into whether that person usually lies or not, or whether there is a reason why that person might lie on this occasion. If, having done such analysis, we determine that the person would not lie and would speak the truth, then what that person says about the matter would be reliable. Through such a route, we can come to the conclusion that the person's speech is valid about this topic, whereupon we can rely on what the person reports. One has to examine whether that person's speech can be considered to be valid or not. If yesterday the person said that there was a flower outside the wall, but today says there is not, there would be a contradiction between what was said earlier and later. Similarly, a topic such as a subtle presentation of the exact effects of a particular action, karma, is not something that we can determine through our usual reasoning. We have to rely on a person who has experience with these facts. Thus, we need to examine whether that person has a reason to lie about such things, and whether there are explicit or implicit contradictions in the person's earlier and later statements on this topic. Through such examination, it can be determined that what this person says about this is reliable. For example, our knowledge of our birth date and birthplace is not from reasoning, but depends on our mother's word, based on what she said. We speak of our birth date and birthplace. And then he says, I can figure out that I am less than 60 years old by looking at others who are 60 years old and comparing their faces with my own face reflected in a mirror. I can see that I don't quite look like someone who is 60, but there's no possibility for me to know the exact time, date, month, and year of my birth. I could never calculate this for myself, and instead must rely on some other factor. Such a situation of having to rely on another's word occurs frequently in ordinary life. Of course, now with plastic surgery, that one's kind of blown out of the water too. Okay, let's see. I think we'll just move on now, unless there's something else anyone has to add. Okay. So I think we've basically done question 6, the kind of cognizers. I'll just review it again for everyone. Evident, obvious, manifest phenomena can be known through direct sense perception by an ordinary being. Slightly hidden phenomena are known through inference by power of the fact, using logical reasoning. The very hidden phenomena can only be known through a process that involves depending on someone else's word, this being called inference through believability or belief based on authoritative testimony. Okay, question 7. To correctly infer that a scriptural passage is accurate and free from fault, we must test it by means of a threefold analysis. What are the 3 points? So this is a little bit longer, I think. Maybe we'll go with people in the room first. Anyone want to have a go at this?
The threefold analysis. First, to assess and examine the presentation of evident phenomena can be refuted by direct perception. And the next one is you have to assess if the presentation of slightly obscure can be refuted by inference by the power of the fact. And then there is no reason to reject the statement in terms of presentation of very obscure, and then there's the 2 factors underneath that.
Okay.
Which are the explicit in presentation of very obscure phenomena, the explicit and implied meanings have to be free from contradiction.
Right.
And then the other one is that the former and latter passages are free from contradiction. So if you see it in one place, it shouldn't contradict someplace in the scripture where it said someplace else.
Right.
So they use the Profession of Wisdom Sutra a lot with this.
Right. So, for example, for the first point, where the explicit and implicit meanings don't contradict each other, in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, the main topic is emptiness. that is the explicit one, and the implicit teachings are the paths and grounds to full awakening, and everything that you need to know about different kinds of phenomena and paths and grounds. You want to see that in a scripture that these two things don't contradict each other. And then the second factor that you check is in the presentation of very obscure phenomena, that the former and the latter passages don't contradict each other. So for example, at the beginning of a sutra they say Mount Meru is 12 feet tall, and later in the sutra it says it's 12,000 feet tall. Then there's some contradiction.
Does it exist?
Okay. And then the last question for this evening. What does verse 283 mean? Who has no fear of emptiness? Who has no fear? So verse 283 reads, when it is not seen, fear does not begin. When seen, it stops completely. Thus one can say with certainty, those who know a little are afraid. Anyone want to have a go at this one?
Go ahead.
Okay.
When we don't understand emptiness, we aren't afraid of it. And when we perceive emptiness directly, having gone through the gradual process of hearing teachings on it, contemplating, and then meditating, and having a direct perception of emptiness, then there is no fear of emptiness, because we have realized it and have gotten rid of our self-grasping ignorance. So fear arises in people who have little knowledge of emptiness.
And to just expand that, Aryadeva says, so people like cowherds or bankers who don't see emptiness as either good or bad can hear about emptiness 100,000 times and not feel afraid because you just don't regard it as either beneficial or harmful. Or you can go to a teaching on emptiness and there's never anything inside you that shakes because you're not really getting the meaning of what's being said. You might even be able to say the words, but it's not having any impact. So when it is not seen, fear does not begin. When you don't understand anything, you're not afraid of it. So people
want a different question from who has no fear of emptiness and who has no fear, or was that kind of a redundant
I
question?
think that was a typo.
Yeah, or is it who has fear?
Who has fear and who has no fear?
Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And then Gyaltsab makes a comment. Neither a well-trained person nor a fool is afraid to mount a wild elephant, but someone who knows a little about the dangers and benefits of doing so is afraid. And then just to get the feel of this, she goes on to make the comparison of, going to a ski hill. This was my experience when I was younger. And having no clue that things were dangerous. So, I had no clue that being dragged by a hydraulic tow bar, because this is what happened, it gets hooked underneath your jacket. I thought it was just thrilling. I had no idea that this was dangerous, I had no idea that being yanked out of my ski boots by this same hydraulic thing, that the ski people were not very nice. They'd hold it back and hold it back and hold it back. And so then it would hit you, and then your body would go like a rock out of the ski boots. And I just thought this was just wild. Can you imagine now at some of our ages how this would be? Or, at first I had no idea what a black diamond meant. And I thought,
Oh, cool.
it doesn't say don't go. So, so, no knowledge, no fear.
Ron's got a question.
I don't know if there's time for questions. Just okay, I do want to give you what Venerable gave us on this topic, which is great. And she says this. So what about this fear thing? And she says, if you've created a lot of merit, chances are you're not going to have much fear because you will already have trained your mind to see emptiness as the elixir for your suffering. Sound foundation of how self-grasping is the enemy, and you will have a lot of merit so that you can really want to realize emptiness. And then the fear is not going to be so much because you have merit and you have prepared your mind well and you are looking forward to realizing emptiness. Whereas maybe someone who has general knowledge about it might get more afraid. Also, understanding what the objects of refuge are will lessen that fear as well. So you have a question for the crowd?
I was thinking that fear may arise from someone who mistakes lack of inherent existence for lack of existence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so not so much having partial knowledge and
Yeah.
poor understanding.
Right. And Topper?
Previous question.
The previous question being?
Who's afraid of emptiness?
Oh, so.
Okay, sure. Yep, I'll read you what I've got.
The question was,
Okay, the threefold analysis. So to infer that a scriptural passage is accurate and free of fault, there's a threefold analysis that you have to give for a scriptural passage. The first one is, there is no reason to reject that scripture in terms of its presentation of obvious or evident phenomena. Its statements regarding the obvious phenomena are not invalidated by a direct perceiver. So if there is a scripture that says all cantaloupes are purple, that can be invalidated by a direct perceiver. We can perceive that cantaloupes are not purple. So then saying that the scriptural passage or the whole scripture is valid, you can say, well, no, even in obvious things, that particular part is wrong. It's not an authoritative scripture because I can see that cantaloupes are not purple. Then the second one is, there's no reason to reject the statement or the text in terms of its presentation of slightly obscure phenomena. And to evaluate this, we see what its arguments are for talking about ultimate truth and other kinds of topics that can be proven by using reasoning. A particular passage cannot be invalidated by the inference that is used to prove slightly obscure phenomena. So, in the case of a scripture, let's say it starts talking about functional things that are permanent, this can be refuted by using reasoning. And then Venerable Children also said it's important to note when it comes to Chittamatra or Sautrantika, some of those teachings we accept and some we don't accept. And because some of those teachings can be refuted through inference by power of the fact, that happens when they're asserting true existence, but we don't throw out the whole thing. We test them. And then the third is, there's no reason to reject the statement or entire text in terms of its presentation of very obscure phenomena, and there's two factors to examine. The first one, the explicit and implicit meanings don't contradict each other. Explicit meaning is the evident theme of the sutra or scripture, and its implicit meaning are the other topics that act as the basis for talking about the explicit meaning. For example, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the main topic is emptiness. That's the explicit one. The implicit teachings are the paths and grounds. The second factor to check is that the presentation of very obscure phenomena, the former and latter passages don't contradict each other. So as was mentioned before, earlier it may say Mount Mary was 12 feet tall, and later on it says it's 12,000 feet tall. Then there's some contradiction. On this basis, when there are things that only a Buddha can know because they are out of range of our knowledge, then we can trust what the Buddha says about those kinds of things. If a scripture meets these three criteria, then accepting those statements as true will give us knowledge about the things we would not ordinarily know about. Okay. So we made it. So thank you, online people. I think Venerable Semke, who's going to do the next 8 questions, will be calling on you too next week. And thanks for joining in.
Someone's asking what's the name of the first book by His Holiness you read from. Is it Becoming Enlightened?
Yes. Becoming Enlightened.
English writing.
Oh.
There you go.
But this is a great book if you haven't read it yet. The Dalai Lama at Harvard. Very cool, 1981. Okay, so you weren't born yet. Well, you can still read the book. Okay.
Some of the last stuff you read kind of contains an answer for the fourth question a bit. Emptiness is an important teaching of the Buddha, and if we start to understand that, it gives you confidence in the less than more obscure stuff.
Yeah, good point, Brian.